Now let's use some curves to build some small cables on our stun gun. So we want to have some cables kind of coming in on the inside of these brackets that we created. So to do that, let's draw them out with curves, and then we'll create geometry to kind of flow along with that. So let's go ahead, and I'm just going to go to Create, CV Curve Tool, and I want them to kind of come in from here. And so I'll just start to draw this out. And I'm not going to try to keep it straight. I want to have a little bit of shape to it. And then as it comes up to the front, I'll just bring it up to the top. Go ahead and hit Enter to complete that. Let's go ahead and move this over, because right now it's at the origin, and we can kind of get it in a rough position. So as we drew it, it was drawn on basically one plane. So now in our perspective view, we can kind of shape this in 3 dimensions. So I can come in and bring this in. You can see a lot of these points are penetrating right now into the brackets, so kind of bring that in a little bit more, whereas this kind of, as it extends out in front of the bracket, can kind of curve a little bit. And then this part I want to extend into this piece of geometry, so just make sure that it's able to do that. Kind of do the same thing here. And so now we need to create the geometry that's going to go along this curve, and we want it to be kind of a tube shape. So that's going to be kind of a circular shape. So we'll use another NURBS curve. This time we'll use a primitive though. Let's use a circle. So we've got that circle selected. We won't change anything about the circle. We'll go ahead and shift click on the curve. And let's go to Surfaces. And let's go in and do an extrude. We'll open up the options, and let me just reset everything and just make sure it's the way that it is kind of at default. And so what I want to do is change the style, make sure it's on tube, and then I want the position of the geometry to be along the path. So I'll change the path. And then the pivot for that as it goes along, I want to be component, and everything else is fine. Let's actually change the output geometry to polygons. And then we can change this to a general tessellation method. And so this is kind of doing the conversion that we would do later if we wanted to turn this into a polygon. It's kind of doing that conversion right now instead of later. So I want to set this to quads, general, and then let's go to per span. And let's set this to, let's actually set the U to 1. And let's set the V to just 2 and see how that comes out. Let's go ahead and apply it. Okay, so you can see here that around the circle, it still keeps that low subdivision, but on the V direction, which is along the curve, it's added basically 2 polygons for every span, so that if I were to come in and actually change this back, it's kind of hard to see, so we can just create a NURBS. So basically, we're saying when we set those polygon parameters, we're saying around this direction, everywhere you see an isoparm, that's kind of the same divisions we're going to have in our polygon. And then in the V direction, we set that to 2. So that's saying, you know, coming along here, for every section, we want to have 2 divisions. So we want to kind of subdivide that up, if that makes sense. So going back to our polygons, you can see we'd set that to 2, which gives us those polygons. Now it's a little bit large, so what we can do is use the history that we have to go and select our circle, and then we'll go into the Make NURBS Circle, go down to Radius, and we can change this radius to change the thickness of our tube. And let's set this down to something like 0.4. I want it to have a little bit of thickness to it. And the reason that I kept this as a polygon is so that I can make some sort of ribbed detail on it. And so let's go ahead and go View Selected. Now I want to delete the history on this. And let's go back now, and we're working with polygons again. So we'll go back to Polygons, Menu Set, Edit Mesh, and let's go into the Insert Edge Loop tool. And I want to insert an edge loop, but let's say that I want to kind of maintain the curvature. I can turn on Edge Flow and come in here, and you can see it kind of keeps that curve rather than putting it straight in. Okay, and kind of do the same thing down here, and you can see it kind of tries to maintain that curvature. All right, so now what we can do is in order to create that kind of ribbed look will basically just kind of take every other row of polygons. So I'm just clicking, shift, double clicking to get those rows. And same thing over here. So basically we've got kind of every other row. Let's just now do an extrude. We'll add a little bit of thickness, maybe 0.1 or 0.15 to get a little bit thicker. And if we want it to be a little bit harder, you can add a division in there, but I think something like that will be just fine. So that gives you that sort of raised look. Now, oftentimes when we're building things like this that are just penetrating right in, sometimes it'll help to actually add a kind of a connector piece to it, just so that visually it makes a little bit more sense that that's sticking right in there. It could be in the texture, but let's go ahead and bring in just a cylinder shape. And so just where this tube connects up, we'll add that in. So we can kind of bring the radius down a little bit. And a little bit more. And then we can just kind of put this in there. Let's add a subdivision along the cap. We'll take our subdivisions here down a little bit. We can double click on that edge and bring that out a little. And then if we wanted to, we can kind of extrude this down a bit. And so now you see that, you think, oh, okay, it's sort of connected up in there, instead of just sticking right into the surface. And we can take this piece, we'll duplicate it over here, and we need to rotate it 90 degrees. Now you can see we've got all this sort of geometry inside there. You can get rid of that too if you want to. Here we can make it a little bit bigger and just kind of stick it right out there. And that just makes maybe a little bit more sense, again, than it sticking right into the surface there. And having those little details sometimes really help. So let's select all these pieces, these three pieces, basically the tube and then the two connectors. Let's freeze our transformations. Let's go ahead and group those together. Now, creating the group puts the pivot again at the center point. So now all we have to do is hit Control D to duplicate, -1 in the X, and freeze the transforms, and we've now created a mirror image on the other side. All right, so that's a look at creating our little cables here. The next thing that we want to do is we want to add a little bit of detail to the side of the barrel. So we've got some kind of ramps that we want to add later, and then we want to kind of build a kind of extracted piece on the side. So just a little bit more detail to bring this gun to life. So let's go ahead and do that next.